in mine and your cases, like we are
Mm.
identified as Black people, right?
Right, right.
And so it's still, at least in my experience, it's very common for Black people to tell me like who I am and how I should identify and what I should believe and things of that nature. And
Mm.
like I said, when you're biracial, we're the only race where that is still considered acceptable.
Can you share at all? I know we talked a little bit about it before. A little bit about what your lived experience has been like growing up biracial in Mississippi.
Yeah, yeah. So being biracial in Mississippi, specifically where I grew up in Mississippi, I grew up on the coast in a small town called Long Beach that is 90% white. And so it was majority white town, and then the other 10% is Black folks.
Mm.
And specifically, growing up in the 90s, the early 2000s, in my hometown, my sister and I were the only two like light skinned Black people in our hometown, really. There was one other light skinned Black girl, and I say that because the fact that she was light skinned and not biracial was something that was always a topic of conversation in our hometown.
Mm.
So that is to say, my sister and I were definitely considered kind of unique. We stood out. People would go out of their way to ask us, "Are you biracial? Are you mixed?" And we were also just treated differently by the kind of white establishment in our town. Like I always understood that I was regarded as different than Black folks in our town. For example, my high school sweetheart was a white guy with a family who was not supportive of our relationship. And when I
Mm-hmm.
would talk to people about it and describe that, his family is not comfortable with him dating me because I'm Black, people in my hometown, their immediate reaction would always be, "But you're only half." And so I feel like it's a good example of how I was seen and regarded as different
Yeah.
than fully Black people in my hometown. And then when I left Mississippi and moved to Philly and was in a more diverse environment, I think Philly is like I don't know if it's majority a Black city, but obviously it has a very large
Pretty
Black
close though, I would say.
population. Yeah, right. And Penn's campus is in West Philly, so I was like just in the most like the blackest area of Philly, I guess you could describe it as. And then that was the first time in my life I ever started being regarded as just like a Black girl. Before, growing up where I did, I was always seen as I was regarded as mixed and biracial, which is what I am. And so that was an interesting thing for me in terms of my identity, and I feel like it definitely plays a role in some of my struggles with
Mm.
dating. My mom and I actually just had a conversation about this the other day where I said to her, "I'm Black, but," and she cut me off and she said, "The world sees you as Black, but you're biracial."
Mm.
And that, and I'm sure, or perhaps you can relate being biracial yourself. It's like there can be a difference in the way you're identified by the
Mm.
world, and the way you yourself identify, especially in my case, having a white mother. Like my example
Yeah.
for femininity and womanhood is from a white woman.
Yeah.
And that inherently makes me different from a Black woman who grew up with a Black mom, regardless
Correct.
of how I look, or the fact that your typical person will not necessarily assume that I am biracial. In my
Mm-hmm.
experience, it's been like 50-50. Like, if one of the two people thinks I'm biracial, one and two is surprised when I mention it. So it really just depends.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is to say, I feel like my identity has colored a lot of just my kind of absent or lack of a community, and like yearn. I definitely yearn for that. I've always kind of wanted to find a space where I feel like I belong and where I feel like I fit in and people can relate to my lived experience. Because,
Yeah.
and the thing about being biracial is like even that's a broad category with a variety of different experiences. Like you and I are both biracial, but like I had a white mom and you had one that's Latina. So
Yeah.
it's just
It's
it
very
definitely
different.
has a layer of complication on top of like everything else that we discussed.
Oh yeah. No, and I appreciate you sharing a lot of that. It brings up a lot for me because I remember like you were saying, trying to seek out community. I remember even as young as middle school and getting into high school, I remember I sought out people who were like me in terms of having parents from different cultural backgrounds because I felt like we had a little bit more of an understanding that even our parents didn't understand. My father certainly he never really tried to explain it to me, and I get it because he couldn't really relate. Um, but I want to go back to that point that you were mentioning because I think that was very important. The way the world sees us. So to be clear, if you're in the U.S., if you're half black, quarter black, a fifth black, you're black. And so it doesn't really matter how you see yourself outside of like maybe your circle. That's how the world will see you for the most part. Or I shouldn't say the world, excuse me. The US will see you. It's not true for the world. But in terms of how you see yourself, very important. So it's very complicated, right? Because sometimes we don't get the full experience of being immersed in both aspects of our culture. I know that's something where we're a bit different. I know I shared with you before that I got a good taste of both. Even though I grew up primarily with my father and his side of the family, the black side of my family, I spent a lot of time with my mom's side of the family. So I got a really good sense of what it means to be Latino and from their particular country in El Salvador and Central America. And so I feel like I got a good taste of both, right? For you, I remember when you were telling me, and that's something I thought was very profound, was that you really only got that experience and exposure to your mom's side. You didn't really get it from your father's side, the black side, which is an interesting dynamic because the world, or excuse me, the US is seeing you in that manner, but you might not even fully identify with it because you don't really understand it because of the lack of exposure. Is that a fair way to phrase that?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It really wasn't. I'm really. This is another reason I wanted to go to school in a city, and that I was excited for Philly in particular because of the Black community and the culture there.
Yeah.
Until going to school in Philadelphia, I have to be honest that I really did not feel like I felt like a black girl in terms of my lived experience, like we're describing, like the way the world treated me and the fact that I dated this man whose parents did not approve of me. So
Mm.
I understood that. I guess the way I would describe it is I really only stood the black experience in terms of racism, and that's it. Like I didn't really, outside of my dad, I did not grow up with any black influence in my life at all.
Yeah.
Um, or it was very, very limited. And it was, and also when the little bit that I did had, I was often reminded that I was different. Like, for example, my mom put my sister and me on a black cheerleading team when we were little girls in an attempt to kind of expose us to that side of our culture
Yeah.
and like make some black friends. And we just were, I have lots of memories of just being treated differently by just even from the beginning. People weren't necessarily very friendly or welcoming towards my mom. They would be like kind of mostly welcoming and neutral towards my sister and me, but with my mom, it was kind of like, um, or they would make comments like my dad is very, very dark skinned. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like probably has the darkest skin you can possibly have as a person.
He might have to compete with my dad. I don't know about that, but anyway.
So my dad, he's dark. And whenever the first time he ever came to a cheer practice, just to say hey to me and my sister briefly and then left, one of the moms looked at my mom and was like, "Oh, good thing you got him. He's too dark. He needed to have kids with a white woman and have pretty kids."
Wow.
And that just hearing,
It's pretty insensitive.
yeah, and we heard a lot of stuff like that growing up. Like my mom describes a lot of different comments like that from people, and it's not something my dad ever talked about. And I can only assume that's because it was just hurtful. I feel like my dad. This is just me making assumptions based on things that my mom has told me and that he himself has said, because he never told me this himself.
Yeah.
But I feel like he because of the darkness of his skin, he did actually feel like more at home, at least with my mom and her family, because it just wasn't a topic of conversation. Like in my
Mm.
family, in my mom's family, there was no like dark skin, light skin. I had no concept of that until
Right.
I started having experiences with other black people and learning that it's preferable to have light skin and curly hair and things. I didn't know anything like that until my interactions with other black folks. And I will
Yeah.
say that it's just another testament to the I guess just like the stress of the biracial experience, because there
Yeah.
is so much I still experience racism from white people being a black girl to them, and then within my own community, there's all these there's you know
It's colorism.
yeah, colorism, and to have someone blatantly say that, like, oh, good thing my mom is white because I'd be ugly otherwise. Like, obviously, I remember that. I was 6 years old when I heard her say that, and I remember it for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't really have a major point there, but
No,
that's
no,
just,
no, no, no. There is no point. It's just you being able to be open to share, because a lot of us have those types of experience. And I'm not gonna go on and on and on because we'd probably be here for days talking about this, because I could go in. I'm trying specifically not to, but I really want to make sure that you had the space to do that, because I haven't had as many conversations yet with people like us. And when I'm meaning us, I mean people from two different cultural backgrounds, and trying to understand what it's like to navigate that, especially if you don't get to, again, be fully immersed in one side of it. It's very hard when you're trying to figure out, again, going back to the bigger overarching point, to figure out who you are. It's hard to understand that. And when you have, like, for me, I imagine, well, I hope, I can't say I know for sure. I hope my son won't have as much of a difficulty with it, because I can speak to it. I can give some perspective on what it was like for me. Not that he's the same, not that we are the same, but I can at least talk about some of that lived experience. When you're not, you don't necessarily know what to say about it, other than the world's going to treat you like this. Okay, let's move on.
yeah.
It's like, no, there's a lot more nuance there. And I think it's important for those of us that are from those backgrounds, and especially those of us that have children, to make sure that we're open enough to share. Because think about what you were saying. Like, there was a lot of pain perhaps that your father held back
Mhm.
because he didn't maybe know how to articulate it. And I don't, I don't blame him. My father didn't say anything about it. Again, like, when you don't know something, it's hard to talk about something you're not really familiar with.
Mhm.
So I get it. But at least trying to create an environment, dad, mom, I heard this person say this to me. It made me feel bad. This person said this to me. What does that mean? Why did you guys choose each other? Like, did you not go through any challenges? Was there not people in your families telling you maybe it wasn't a good idea, or maybe they were open to it? Because I've heard different things, and I just want to understand. So it helps me understand who I am, so I can be confident in who I am and how I see myself, irregardless of how society may see me or may treat me.
Mhm.
Right? That's why I think it's important to have these conversations. So I sincerely hope that you are able to find that type of community that you're looking for. I do think, to put a more positive spin on this, I do think that there's more of us that are being created, which I think is awesome,
Yeah.
because I think it won't be as taxing or challenging of a topic to engage in, because you kind of, at some point, we're all going to have to, even if we don't want to, because it's so prevalent that you can't really escape it. It's like, come on, man, you're seeing so many different examples of different type of couples and different types of marriages and relationships. So it's not so scary anymore. So
Mhm.
let's make sure that we are fostering good dialogue, when it comes to that. So I think that is absolutely going to be in the future. So hopefully it'll be a little easier.
Yeah, and kudos to you for being someone who is leading the charge in a way by having your own platform, inviting me, giving me space to talk about it. I've definitely tried to do something similar myself on TikTok, where I do create a lot of content and I
Yeah.
talk a lot about the biracial experience. And say things that I know people are going to have strong reactions to, because I think
Mm.
another thing I will say about being biracial is we're still the only race where people who are not biracial feel empowered to tell us who we are and what we experience and how we should identify. We're the only race these days
Yeah.
where that is acceptable. If a
Yeah.
white person cannot tell a black person, this is your experience and this is how you should identify. We all know that
Right.
that's acceptable.
Right.
Whereas when you're biracial, the community that you technically belong to, or like the majority side, majority to say that, in mine and your cases, like we are
Mm.
identified as black people, right?
Right. Right.
And so it's still, at least in my experience, it's very common for black people to tell me like who I am and how I should identify and what I should believe and things of that nature. And
Mm.
like I said, when you're biracial, we're the only race where that is still considered acceptable. So something that
Heard.
I've been trying to do myself is say that honestly and
Yeah.
describe why it's a problem, and be a little bit confrontational when that happens to me. Like, there's a video on my TikTok where I say, if you are not biracial, you do not know what it's like to be biracial. You
Yeah.
cannot tell me about my lived experience, and you do not have to. And two, people sometimes will also like. I feel like the definition of biracial can get kind of murky too.
Right.
You know, it's like, someone one time I said I was biracial, and a man asked me like, oh, like, you know, dark skinned parent, light skinned parent. I was like,
That's
no.
no, that's colorism, man.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, that's not being biracial. So I was like, not black parent, white parent. And he was like, oh, okay. I was just checking because, you know, some people say that if they, you know, if they have a dark skinned parent, a light skinned parent, they call themselves biracial. I was like,
No, you're just whatever you are.
yeah,
But
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
no, because there's inherently more challenge with what we're talking about. Because again, it's difficult because you're trying to fold in two different cultures.
Yeah,
That's what makes it difficult.
yeah,
It's not if you're from the same culture, it's not as difficult. Like, you know, if you come from a more homogeneous part of the world, so you come from one country where pretty much everybody's like that. Like you said, your dad's derives from Nigeria, right? From his roots.
yeah,
So if we were all from Nigeria, it's like, okay, I have a light-skinned Nigerian mom and a dark-skinned Nigerian dad. You're still Nigerian. It's fine.
yeah.
We also
right.
understand the culture for the most part. It's not that complicated. Versus
Yeah.
when they're completely different. If your dad's Nigerian and your mom's French, that's going to be difficult. Trying to figure out how to make those two merge in the benefit of your children. So I agree. If there's some confusion there, yeah, let's put that to rest right now. That's not what what it means
Yeah.
at all.